Welcome everybody to the Depths of Motherhood podcast. I'm your host, Danielle. Today we're going to have a conversation on what is happening in the world right now with Israel and Palestine. In this episode, Angelina, a woman deeply connected to Palestine through her father's lineage, is here to be a bridge to understand the history and the background more deeply and with more compassion and love. I actually came across Angelina's post before I'd seen any other social media post about what was happening in Palestine. The photo to this post is a picture of Angelina, and it says, "This is Palestine." And she has a beautiful message. She says, "I am Palestine. I carry my homeland in my blood. I bleed the same as you bleed. I cry the same tears as you do. I laugh just as you do. And I feel pain that carries the echoes of my ancestors. My people are being systematically erased. When I speak up against the human rights violation my people endure, I am told I am anti-Semitic. When I share the history of the 75 years of occupation and oppression my people faced, I am told I support terrorists, all because I am against the illegal Israeli settlements in the West Bank." I noticed in myself when I saw her post that it woke something up inside of me. I'd been in women's circles this last week with a woman from a family who had escaped from Israel the week before, and I was sitting in circle with her and crying as she shared about her deep pain for what was happening in Israel and also what was happening in Palestine. And she was praying and praying for the war to end. She was praying and praying that the Palestinians would be free and would be safe. And as I sat and I witnessed this woman, I felt my heart opening. There was no sides when it came to the innocent people. There was this deep connection to the knowing that every single human being deserves the right to safety, to nourishment, to opportunities. And through her words, I started to crack open to feel the depth of this. In this conversation today, Angelina shares so vulnerably, with so much courage, her first-hand experiences when being in Palestine. And she brings to light what constitutes as a genocide. This is a word that we've probably all seen recently on social media. And we felt the most important thing for this conversation was to understand the meaning of genocide and why this word is being used during these times. Angelina peels back the layers of history in the Middle East, acknowledging the complexities that defines this moment. And we speak about how this devastation is actually serving as a catalyst to ask humans to step up, to be a voice for change, and question the intentions of the people who are running the country, who are supposed to be protecting the people. At the end of this episode, Angelina really delves into what we can do on an individual level to remember our connectedness, to remember that as one person suffers, so we feel it in our bones, and how we can come to raise our consciousness to hold humanity and to find the strength and the courage to stand up and call out the words, the actions of others that are harming our brothers and sisters, that are bringing them to their death, that are neglecting them, that are oppressing them. Finding my voice has been a really interesting and deep journey during these times as I explore my own inner narratives and what it means to be present at these times, what it means to hold, what it means to witness and love what it means to witness these people going through this nightmare There's the fear of making a mistake, of being wrong, of facing being exiled from my community. And that is within me, and still I am holding it with love. I see you. I know that you're feeling. I know that your nervous system is awake when it comes to this situation. I know that you don't know everything, and that's okay. And I feel like one of the things that I'm learning so deeply is it's okay not to know everything, but showing up in full integrity, in truth, and expressing what I believe is to be true is the most authentic way of living. And being open to be called in or be called out if what I'm saying is causing any harm. So thank you for being here in this conversation, and I hope that it serves you in some way. Thank you. Thank you for your courage and your strength for joining me. Thank you.
Well, thank you for providing a platform for those of us that are really trying to forge a path for peace. I think that we need the help and all the solidarity that we can get, because, for me as a Palestinian, I'm not just thinking about the present moment. I think it's quite easy to think about, the injustice and the pain and the suffering. But I truly want to see a path towards peace. I want to see the reconstruction of communities. And in order to do that, we have to talk about the history, we have to talk about the issue, so that there's a general understanding, doesn't necessarily have to be an agreement, but more so like the narrative, this is the Palestinian narrative, this is the Israeli narrative. And it's so nuanced because, even within that, there are subsects, right? Because me being Christian Palestinian, there's that narrative, but I'm also coming from a background being Christian from Italian roots and from a different origin, right? So that makes it a little bit even more so nuanced, because within the region you do have Christian Palestinians who were raised in Bethlehem and went to the church that Jesus was born in, right? So that's a different flavor, as well as the different sects to Islam and Judaism. There are so many different subsects to Judaism. And what does it mean to be an Israeli Jew? What does it mean to be an American Jew, an Ashkenazi, a Mizrahi, a Jew that's coming from Europe, from the Middle East? We have so many identities. And so, of course, the narrative is going to be nuanced, and it's not going to be, a complete, clear, just, soundbite that the media or any of us can pick up on. So I think the more we can kind of just allow ourselves to kind of just absorb what we're hearing and just hear the narratives, the more we can have kind of like better understand how to just humanize one another and connect from not a place that's right or wrong, but from a place of how do we figure this thing out? How do we figure this relationship out, and in a lot of ways it's a relationship. And so understanding each other's language, and it's a whole thing. So I'm so grateful. And yeah,
let's try and unravel some stuff, because these words that we're hearing, all these words, the religion, the culture, different ways of putting language to different perspectives, it can be very overwhelming. Even for myself, when I would say that I've been looking into this and I have been open up to listen to different people's views my whole life, still it can feel a lot. So today I hope that we can unravel and unpack a few things so that whoever's listening gets an opportunity to hold space for these different perspectives, but really get clear on what some terms actually mean. And so before we really get into it, I'd like for you to just share a little bit about yourself, because you are a conflict resolution mediator. You work with integrating traumatic experiences for people, and you use sound and movement to help with this integration. Could you put it in your own words? Because I don't want to do an injustice to the work you do, because it's incredible.
Oh, thank you so much. I think in a lot of ways, being Palestinian and also being, so let me just communicate what my ethnic backgrounds are. I'm Palestinian, Mexican, Italian, and Apache Indian. So I'm native in two different, I mean, Italians are native in their own country as well. So I have a lot I think I had a lot of unpacking to do for myself in terms of my identity. So it made sense for me to be able to, you know, there's this term for it. I'm a third cultured kid. I wasn't brought up in the countries of my parents' origin, but I
Mm.
still hold those narratives, and I was still brought up with that foundation. And so with that, it allowed me to kind of merge between different communities. And I wasn't always fully accepted, but I was never fully rejected either. And so naturally becoming a mediator just made sense, because we're asked to hold a third party objective, neutral stance. And so I think just naturally going in and out of community and the way that I was brought up allowed for me to kind of like find the beauty in that and make peace with the fact that it's really not about acceptance or being, rejected. It's about, internal acceptance. And also I genuinely have a desire and a passion for helping people understand one another. So maybe it comes from my upbringing, my own trauma, right? So that led me into just the whole world of somatic healing, trauma therapy. And, I went through the lens of yoga, the yoga practice, because it's so attracted to the languaging that was used in traumatic yoga for trauma healing, that I went into the somatic route after the fact. Because I found that, we all carry a degree of trauma. And I think that we don't, in a lot of ways, it's not acknowledged. It's kind of like still a taboo that, oh, I'm, somewhat damaged, or there's this problem. But in fact, we all have our things, we all have our baggage.
The cockerel's like, I want to be in there.
Yeah, they'll say hi from time to time, guys. So yeah, so I naturally went into that. And when I was 17, I was trained by the man that runs Martin Luther King's organization today. His name is Dr. Bernard Lafayette, and I want to just pay respect and homage to him and his mission in life. The last day before Martin Luther King was assassinated, the last words that he said to Dr. Lafayette on the telephone was, "We need to institutionalize and internationalize nonviolence. It needs to become a way of life for people." For me, it's become a practice at 17. I took that very seriously, and I'm 35 now, so it's been an honor to hold to serve in that way, and to hold King's mission where I go. So that's kind of what brought me into this field altogether. It's the nonviolent work, communication. And so naturally coaching and counseling, having done my own integrative work, and being in a really great place to serve, and to come from a place where, I've gone through the work. I think it's always helpful to have that support from somebody that kind of knows what you're going through. So that's kind of how I got into this work.
Oof. Thank you so much for sharing. And it's great to get to know you even more deeply. I forgot to mention, but to everyone who's listening, we met when I was pregnant. I think I was pregnant. I hadn't had a Raya yet. And when I met you, I felt like I knew you for a long time. I connected to you very quickly, just the way that you're so open and you hold this soft heart energy with you. And so it's really nice to meet different aspects of you. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, thank you. And you were so amazing, so beautiful and vibrant. Just the strong mama bringing in, a new earth baby into this world, and just forging a path for our next generations to come. I was just in love with your beauty and your aura, and just how open you were with me too.
Thank you. So before we really get into some questions, shall we just take a moment to ground, because this is a very sensitive topic. And for anyone that's listening, I don't know where you're at with how you're feeling or thinking about this, but I want to say thank you for being here, for taking time to listen to these words and to feel more deeply to that human connection that we have. So if we can just take this moment now to notice our breath and to feel our breath coming in to our body, so that our body can soften, so that our body can open, and notice where there's any unnecessary tension. And without saying that it has to go away, it has to change, just hold it with love and let your breath run into your body. Let it soothe you, let it ground you in this moment. And take in this time to feel into our heart space, to remember that connection through us, through everything. Send in the deepest love for what is happening in these moments, in these days. And tuning into our intention for being here, for what wants to come through, for what wants to be shared, and appreciating our vessel that can hold this and share through words and expression. Thank you. So you were sharing about your beautiful background with all the bloodlines that run through you. Could you share a little bit more about your connection specifically to Palestine?
I'm Palestinian through my father's side, and he was born in Jerusalem, and my family is from Jerusalem. And in 1948, they were forcefully removed from Jerusalem. So we also had family that were forcefully removed in 1967, which was the first Intifada. So in 1948 was the creation of Israel. During that time, it was called, the British colonial rule existed within that region, and so it was considered they called it the Palestinian Mandate. So it was Palestine, and this was around the time of the Zionist movement. Naturally, Palestinians, we're indigenous people. We didn't view land like Europeans did. So the way that we migrated, we didn't have land contracts that shifted, right? That European capitalistic expectation to have land ownership. So naturally, we did have many Palestinians that have they still hold their keys to their homes that were demolished or they were forcefully removed in 48. And so when you have those influx of European Jews with that narrative in mind in terms of like land and ownership, they're coming into a region where there was already diversity and there was already just peace. Palestinians, Jews, the Jews that did exist in the region at the time, it was quite peaceful. My family's from Jerusalem, and it's important to share the history of Jerusalem in order to share my own background because we're so tied. And in my culture, a lot of our identity is tied to the greater narrative and the history. So it's hard to speak about me without speaking about that narrative. So in Jerusalem, before the British Mandate of Palestine, Jews, Arabs, Muslims were living in peace and harmony with one another because within that tiny plot of land, it's about 10-minute walk to each major religious site. So for Christians, it's the place where Jesus was risen from the dead. For Jews, the Wailing Wall is there. And for Muslims, it's the place where Muhammad, peace be upon him, ascended into heaven. And so naturally there was already a mixing of religion and spirituality in that region before what we call settler colonialism existed. Just want to reiterate the fact that this conflict is so nuanced and our identities are so nuanced, and the fact that the influx of an ideology, capitalist perspective, European Jewish perspective with the ideology of Zionism, which is the idea that there's a need for a Jewish state for a Jewish people, so that the first Holocaust, so that the Holocaust or genocide could never happen again. That kind of sparred that belief system into being, birthed that belief system. But at the same time, within the region of Palestine, that wasn't a narrative there. It was a very simple life. It was a very simple form of thinking. And I think, just to kind of bring in perspective, it's similar to what happened in North America with the Native Americans being massacred by what we consider to be America today, but even the French were involved, Canadians were involved, the British were involved. So it's a different, when you have two ideologies interacting with one another, and one views their ideology as more superior and has more means, in another form of thinking, great book called Germs, Guns, and Steel. When you have resources that can wipe out a population, naturally that is going to make your ideology, your system, a little bit more superior to the other because you've annihilated a population. And
I love the way that you've simplified it so that we can digest this a little bit more. And this kind of can move us into this word being genocide so that we can start to unpack this a little bit to understand it. Because I can even say for myself, like when this all started to come to the surface, I found that a lot of fears came up. And this has been for me a definite unraveling into my own biases and beliefs and my conditioned mind. And really, it's been this opportunity to become human again. And so, with this term genocide, there seems to be a fear around it when it comes to this situation. And I have seen it through social media and in the news. To use this term is to side with terrorists. To say ceasefire, to stop all of this in Palestine, is to side with Hamas. But anyone who's hearing that is scary. And I feel from my own self, when I'm seeing and reading and hearing this, it shakes my nervous system in a way that I couldn't really understand. So I am definitely going through a transition into what I've held on as beliefs, really subconscious beliefs that I didn't really feel had any influence on anything really. But now I'm seeing, just through feeling my own fear, but being able to hold it is something that's massive. So what is genocide?
well, first of all, I just want to honor your process for coming to a realization that maybe the belief systems that have been implanted in us aren't always what they appear to be, and it's a bit more complex, and how to grapple with something that we didn't realize we identified with, and how is that shifting in some ways, and um, is it okay to oscillate between perspectives? And I really honor that journey that you're taking and that many of us are taking, is it's affecting all of us in so many ways in that way, right? And for Palestinians, we're finally getting to be seen as human beings. We're finally being heard and not seen as terrorists. Finally having the opportunity to share culture, perspective, where our kufiyas, without it being symbolic as, hate and anger and distrust, or, terrorism. So let's start with genocide. I think it's healthy to, for me at least, I like always try to rest on kind of a collective opinion of what these terms are. And sometimes that my opinion of what that term is may be slightly different from the collective, but it's just nice to have some languaging that's been used internationally. And so for that, I'm just going to quickly read the definition that was defined by the United Nations. Um, so in 1948, December 9th, 1948, this was a few years after the Holocaust in, in World War II for the European Jews. This convention was implemented. So the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crimes of Genocide came into place to basically come up with a system to prevent any other forms of genocide to exist in the world. They saw enough from the atrocities that had happened at that time. And so that term, in short, the definition of that is a crime committed with the intent to destroy a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group in whole or in part. So a crime committed with the intention to destroy a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group in whole or in part. So just to break down the nuance of that, they use the word or, right, in languaging. So it could be a national group, it could be an ethnic group, it could be a racial group, a religious group, in whole or in part. It doesn't have to be an entire annihilation. So it's very clear and specific languaging, but at the same time kind of broad, right? So they can read it. So we can connect to the subtler aspects of what genocide can look like for Palestinians. It's a slow process of this annihilation of our population starting in 1948 to now. So it's not like World War One when that's not the first documented genocide. Let's go to the first documented genocide. So the first documented genocide is the Armenian genocide. Of course, I want to acknowledge indigenous populations of the world that have already experienced their own forms of genocide, have continued to experience these forms of genocide that's far reaching from Sudan to South Africa, all over the place. But we have these three precursors that the United Nations acknowledges them to be genocide to an extent. So the first one is the Armenian genocide that happened in 1915 through 1916. So the spring of 1915 to the autumn of 1916, this is during the Ottoman Empire. So at that time, 1.5 million Christian Armenians existed in a multi-ethnic Ottoman Empire. So Ottoman Empire is Turkish Empire, primarily, that was far-reaching. It spanned from Europe to the Middle East to I think another part of another region, but I'm forgetting. I think part of Africa as well. So 1.5 million ethnic, 1.5 Christian Armenians existed. At the end of this genocide, 1.2 of the 1.5 million Christian Armenians were annihilated. So that's almost, it's only left with a quarter, not even a quarter of their population. So you go from 1.5 million to 1.2 being completely annihilated through executions, deportations, which led to refugee camps. So I just kind of want to also highlight the tools and what the tools that were used to define genocide. Many were forcefully removed So they were just soldiers, the Ottoman Empire soldiers came to doorways, forced these Christian Armenians from their homes, line them up and walk them out of these lands, right? Many of them were executed, many of them were walked and sent to execution destinations. And with that, there was a lot of displacement. Many countries, naturally have their own problems and didn't want to support the influx of a population that would take a toll on their own economic and their own stability, their own country stability. So that's how refugees come to be, right? There's displacement. So then fast forwarding to the second documented genocide, which was the Holocaust, 1941 through 1945 during World War II. This was the annihilation of European Jews, specifically European Jews. And it's important to make that distinction because there are Arab Jews. And I think that that's not really clear to a lot of people that aren't kind of involved in this dynamic, because there are two different there's different mentality, different cultures within that. So the European Jews annihilated through executions, deportations, influx of refugees, and that migration led to Israel today. And I'm getting ahead of myself because I know you asked what genocide is, and I'm also sharing the history of genocide. Because I feel like it's just an easy flow to just kind of go there anyway. So then we just move into 1948, the Nakba, the start, forceful remove, the executions, deportations, and the influx of refugees through the creation of the State of Israel and the British rule. Basically, Britain pulled out of the Middle East and allowed for this scenario to happen. That in it of itself is quite nuanced as well. We can talk about that in a different question, but those are the three this is why we consider the Palestinian, we consider it to be a genocide, because of the executions, the deportations, the refugees, not to mention, I think I'm very cautious not to share too much detail about what happened in the Holocaust for European Jews, because I know there's a lot of sensitivity and pain there. So I'll simply say a lot of the tools that were used on the Jews in Europe are now being used on Palestinians in the West Bank and in Gaza. And the only way I can understand that and wrap my head around why that would happen is through the lens of a French theologian named Paulo Freire. He wrote this book called The Pedagogy of the Oppressed. And in that book, he talks about how when the oppressed finally have the means to rise up against their oppressors, they don't know any other way but to use the tools that were used on them against their oppressors. And then it becomes a cyclical process of oppression, right? And so while European Jewish population, Israel, while they're not necessarily taking out their pain, their trauma on those who oppressed them, I see how that has influenced their actions in a lot of ways, and in a lot of the images that we're seeing nowadays with these these men lined up naked, just bare boned, bent over, to feel humiliated and to feel vulnerable, with soldiers over their heads. You have these soldiers dancing, IDF, so Israeli Defense Force soldiers, dancing, making TikToks on the graves and the rubble of in Gaza, former homes and most likely dead bodies. You have the state of Israel arming settlers in the West Bank. So we call settlers. I'm trying to find the right term for it, but they're basically people who are illegally taking over land that was due through jurisdiction is considered to be Palestinian territory in the West Bank. So they're slowly encroaching upon, land that is internationally recognized, even within the state of Israel, to not be Israeli land. And you have the Israeli government arming these settlers with guns and allowing them to basically, it's like the wild, wild west, allowing them to just write leaflets, you better leave, on Palestinian cars and homes, and threatening their lives. They're bulldozing homes constantly, forcefully, putting subjecting many Palestinians through not only abuse but humiliation. There are separate roads for the West Bank as to Israel. Of course, naturally, there are more resources for the state of Israel, so they're pristine. So it just takes you back to the civil rights movement, where you have the segregation of blacks and whites, and separate not being equal. It's just clearly not. And what that does in the psyche, when you see two parks, one that's pristine and well maintained to another that's rusty and barely functioning, naturally you think, oh, these guys, the ones with the pristine park, they must have it going on, they must be the chosen people, they must deserve it, because of this ideology of classism and capitalism. Like, money and power supports prestige. So naturally there's a superiority and inferiority complex that's occurring, where we must be better. And then with this belief system, there's this ideology of otherization. Well, then with the Western wall, with the separation barrier, which Palestinians would call the apartheid wall, it's because it's a division between the West Bank and Israel proper. We have no connection to Gaza. There are so many checkpoints. You can't even get, imagine trying to go to a grocery store in the town over in the city that you live in. You'll be subject to at least 2 checkpoints. You'll be made to get off your car. They'll check your passport, give you a series of questions, basically racially profile you. I've experienced that myself. I had to get off of a bus. They took my belongings. They made me wait for almost an hour. They asked me questions like, what is your father's name? Do you have any special packages to deliver? And they're just waiting to see if you have a reaction. So in my experience, having gone through these checkpoints, having been made to stand in lines, having been asked these just egregious questions, essentially asking me whether I'm a terrorist or not, do I have any special packages to deliver, and then waiting for me to have a rise to prevent me from going to the next destination point, to justify, see, these Palestinians, they're just subhuman, they're terrorists, of course, just kind of agitating the system. And that's essentially what's happening on a larger scale that we're seeing, right? Like, Palestinians are being expected to be perfect. I'm a big proponent for peace and nonviolence and taking the high ground. And also, time and time again, when you have an occupied nation, there's an occupier and there's an occupied nation. In the second intifada, they were acts of civil disobedience, and they were in a lot of ways provoked by just actions that happened in the region. But within that, there were forms of civil disobedience that were nonviolent, and they've not been acknowledged. We've continued to have the same issues happen to our population. So naturally, you're going to see other Palestinians become more hardlined and more vigilant and wanting to see change, and so trying to spark a rise any way possible. But even then, there's this international belief within this theory called just war theory, where if you're engaging in war or you're engaging in any type of conflict, there are actually rules for engagement that have been internationally agreed upon. And so within just war theory, there's this term called proportionality. Are your actions proportionate to the actions of that of the other? And so in Israel in the case of Israel and Palestinians, you have Palestinians throwing rocks. You have Israelis using white phosphorus that was used in Japan, that was used in other wars that have caused tremendous harm to generations still. You have bombing entire villages, bulldozing homes, to Palestinian rocks. And so to see when you see images of a Palestinian boy using a slingshot with a rock, it's like a David and Goliath scenario. We don't have guns. We have no access to that. Israel controls borders of West Bank and Gaza. And also, to be honest, I've told this to many people. It could be, Australia. It could be Japan occupying Palestine. It's not about Jews. It's not about Israel. It's about the acts, the atrocious acts that are being committed upon our people in this genocidal way that we are against. And if you listen to the rhetoric and the narrative and the protests and the languaging, even in Gaza, it's about an uprising for our justice, for our right for autonomy. It's not about hating a population. We hate your acts. We hate the acts that are being committed. We don't hate the individuals. And there are many Palestinians that are going through trauma themselves, that don't have the languaging to say what I'm saying. But I'm speaking on behalf of them, because if they could get past the pain and anger and torment of what it's like to be have to go through generational trauma, to be raised as a little girl or little boy in Gaza, only to go through war your whole life. You've never seen anything else but war. For Palestinian people, it's desire to have an autonomous life, to have what you and I have, simple luxuries of life. The things that we take for granted, fresh drinking water, to be able to drive to the movies, to the grocery store. That's actually what Palestinians want. And the region the community outside of the region has amplified and distorted a lot of what it is, and created this extreme narrative, from the Israeli to the Palestinian. They just want life. And so I'm speaking on behalf of the Palestinians that are traumatized and can't see past their trauma because of what's the system of oppression that they've lived in.
I'm so grateful that you're able to take all of this information and put it in a way that we can digest, so that we have some threads to follow to go deeper into this. So I was just going to share some things that have come up in case people resonate with this, and this feeling of staying silent, because that's what we're going to go on to next. And I noticed things came up for me, like I didn't know enough, like this wasn't my business, like this doesn't have anything to do with me. And these are just phrases that have being passed through on a collective level to keep us silent. And this is all with the bias of who should live and who should die and whose life is worthy. So when I heard this and I fell into it, I was struck with grief, because I knew that this was living on inside of me. And so I actually so grateful because I came across what you was posting. Obviously, I follow you, but then I found other people that were having a voice, that weren't staying silent and were helping me to have some clarity. And I felt inside of me as I watched these videos, like this mother bear energy of like, even if I don't have all of the information, I can see with my own eyes that there is murder happening, and you're trying to put the pieces together, which is amazing. And what I've come to see is just to be in the heart space and see where that guides me, and to notice where I feel like I should be quiet in case I upset someone or in case I lose followers. And the thing is that I can't unsee like what I've seen and what I feel inside of my heart. And another way that there's been an attempt to silence me is, well, why don't you talk about all of the other genocides that are happening, all of the other things happening in the world? And I'll be honest, I've sat with this a lot, and what I can put into words is this is the first time I would say in my lifetime that I've noticed the difference between what's being fed on the news and what I'm seeing is really happening. So if that's the thing that wakes me up, then I can, for one, say I'm so sorry, like that I have not spoken up about anything else before, or maybe I have in a passive way. And that's not a good enough reason for me to lay back down again and pretend I haven't seen it. Because I think when something takes us and inspires us, and I don't know if inspires the word, but wakes us up, opens our heart, reminds us of being human, then get on that train and ride it, because there's something in it, like we're being called forward for that. And with this whole unraveling, I'm also witnessing this, well, this colonized mind for one, but this white supremacy of what's been fed to me through my own lifetime. And that's also been a tough one to hold that, because I feel guilt and I feel shame. There's this new thing of stepping into, which is I am strong enough to hold space for it. I can witness this. I can see these people's pain. I can see myself in these mothers. I can see my child in these children, and vice versa. And that, for me, as painful as this is also a gift to humanity, because we're feeling in that we're all connected. And I'm so like, I haven't got the words for how I feel about this, but I feel, and that's enough. And I know there's this new strength that I can hold it. And for anyone, and so what if this is the first thing to awaken you? It won't end, because this is a connection between humans that's been remembered, and this won't end here. Other things will come into your awareness, and you'll feel, and you can hold that as well. There might be pain, like uncomfortable feelings, situations, conversations, and you can hold it. Like you literally have the strength. I think we've been fed this story that we have to protect ourselves for so long. Like, I'm not going to look away just because it's painful, because it's still happening. I would not want someone to look away from me if I was going through this. And I thought, the first thought that came to my mind was like when the witches were being burnt at the stake. Like, I would have, if I was a witch, I would want someone to look me in the eye as I burn and I die. Like, I wouldn't want to, like, I would feel so alone. And that just, this has really been a massive awakening for me. And so I'm wondering if you could like, go into why it's so important to use our voice, and what ways can we support? What does that mean? Like, how can we do that?
Wow, you said just so much. I'm just, wow, so grateful for you because your shares give us strength. For many years, we've not been able to share our story. It's not been the right time. And thankfully, there are many Arabs and Palestinians that are stubborn and still share it anyway. And I'm so grateful for them. I just never had that strength. It's not really about our struggle, it's about all of the struggles of the world and our own internal struggles with identifying with how we represent ourselves in the world and who the kind of woman, man, person we want to be, individual. And wow, I just find that to be such an honor, and I just really see you, and I'm so grateful to be a part of this journey with you, and to know that your heart is expanding and bursting wide open. And I'm learning a lot from you too, in the fact that, you know yes, we can hold all of this. Of course we can hold it. um it's like a muscle, learning to hold things, because in a lot of ways I've been reluctant to share a lot, because like, this might be too much for people, might be too heavy, I don't want to burden. And so we hold these, in the Western lens, the word boundaries. It's a big hot topic. Like, what are my boundaries? And in a lot of ways, that word is used to justify our selfishness. Um, and there's actually a level of, you know, service that comes with setting boundaries. It's I'm setting these boundaries so that I can be healthy enough to serve the world in the way that, I can show up to be a decent human being. And so stretching our capacity to hold space, um, it's very important. And I think the other end of that is learning how to let go. So we don't necessarily have to hold this pillar of pain. So, if you go to a hospital for an injury, you're bleeding out your arm, you don't want your doctor to bleed out with you. Just like, you want a surgical operation, you want it to stop. And so in this world, I think there's this belief system that I have to I have to bleed too in order for you to see that I'm holding space. Um, but we don't need to hold that. It's more like being a witness, like you are graciously doing with me and with this narrative, and using that to connect to your own series of past lives and traumas, and people that resonate with you on your channel, that do this work too, that really see you as a strong pillar and a voice, which I so greatly see. Like, you just have a way of connecting people to their humanity and to their own true nature, and I'm so grateful for that. And so, yeah, it's a level of, I'm creating space here, but I'm not holding this alone. We have so much support. We're guided in so many different ways. I'm very spiritual. You don't have to be spiritual. The laws of gravity, we're being supported by even science, by nature, by the elements, for me, by our ancestors, angels, and guides. And so nothing is on our shoulders alone, unless it's just in here where we tell ourselves, this is my problem, and or I have to do this thing for someone. And I
And that
think,
again is the saviorist idea, isn't it? Of I am going to save and fix, instead
yeah,
of this witnessing with a deep love, without just being there in that moment.
yeah, exactly. And that's all we need, is to be witnessed. And Palestinians were getting that opportunity now to be witnessed, to be heard without censorship. I'm still working on that in the Israeli communities, the Jewish diaspora, the leftists, because that's not common. So there's still work to do that I'm challenging. I'm still doing that. Palestinian communities that are still dealing with so much pain and trauma, that and anger, that can't can't have conversation right now. So, but witnessing, it's all, I think there's no need to have the answers. We don't. It's a collective support. And so when you ask me what to do, what can we do? How can we be better human beings? How can we cultivate internal peace within ourselves? How can we align and rise to our higher selves, right? Because A dear friend of mine, Ebony, said something on her platform recently, and it was, Palestine is healing us, it's changing us, it's awakening our inner selves in a lot of ways. Like, we can choose to wake up or we can go back to sleep. And so if you choose to wake up, it's not going to be easy. It's not going to be comfortable. So you need to train your body, your mind, to be okay with discomfort. We need to train ourselves that discomfort is not, it's a part of nature, it's a part of life. The world was created through that. To birth a pearl requires intensified pressure. So it's not easy, but if we can work past that hard work allows us to be the in a better place in life. And when we can be in a better place in life and healthier, happier people, we share that, we radiate that with people around us. So if if you don't have the means, the money to don't donate to Gaza, to Palestinian organizations, to supporting, aiding the refugee, cultivate better practices within yourself. Um, if you're still on the fence about boycotting, that's another thing you can do. Divest your money. Where you put your money is how you are communicating to the world. Money is a currency, it's a power, it's an exchange, it holds tremendous magic. And if you can align your money with your actions, your thoughts, your beliefs, your opinions, you're also aligning your higher self, right? You're rising to. But if that's a difficulty for you, you love your Starbucks for whatever reason, then go to protests, show up, show your witness, show solidarity. For me, it's protesting is not about, the end goal of like ending the genocide. Yes, I want that to be, that's always the long-term goal, but it's also to release pain. It's also to be in solidarity with one another. It's also to just emote and express. And so show your support by showing up to these protests. There's no culture, like there's no right or wrong way to show up. You just go. No one's going to know you're not, it's the first time you're there. No one's going to know that you don't fully understand the whole situation. Your heart is going to show up. And so I'd really love to encourage people to act and motivate, because also what you do when you commit to physical acts like walking in a march, using your language like Free Palestine, you're hardwiring your nervous system, you're rewiring your nervous system, right? And you're co-regulating with the people around you. It has tremendous reward within your own personal life, right? There's so many gifts that you can receive. These calls to action that we're having people do, it's actually serving you too. It's you serving your humanity. It's helping us, but it's also serving humanity. It's also challenging the Israeli perspective, saying, we won't allow you to get away with these egregious acts, these forms of intolerance, this hatred. We're holding this mirror up to you so that you can see your ugliness and work through your shit, work through your shadow, work through your trauma. We won't accept it.
You've just put so many powerful words into these feelings inside of me that I couldn't find words for, actually. And I think this is the beauty of having these conversations, of supporting one another to find ways to articulate that feeling inside. And I just hope that everyone comes to find a place that is safe, that is humane, to find these words. Because one thing I wanted to say was, I am so disgusted with what I'm reading in the news, like in the mainstream news, of how the language that they use to dehumanize the people of Palestine, to desensitize us from what is actually happening. So as you've just shared, this witnessing also comes with this responsibility to ground ourselves, to anchor ourselves in our heart space. And it comes this balance. I know a lot of people were doing shadow work, I'm doing shadow work, all this stuff. But when it comes to real life, how can we step into the real world with the things that we've learned without thinking, oh, I can't say this, or I can't do this, I can't protest or step forward to like ruffle feathers because I want everything to be peaceful. Well, this is now where we're being called to look at what does spirituality mean to us? What does it mean to be a healer, to do this work? Because this is the part now where we have a real possibility of transforming and evolving. So it's, first of all, like, how can you anchor and ground yourself in this moment so that you can witness and connect to your heart and remember that we're all connected? And this can be being the voice for this can look many different ways. Like you mentioned, it can come in many expressions, whatever feels authentic or whatever feels true to you. But I think, first of all, just taking a step back and observing, because when you look at the bigger picture, there's no way you can unsee that. Is there anything else that you want to add before we wrap up?
First of all, thank you for holding space and holding this platform for these conversations to happen. You asked a really great question. You said, how can we act? How can we, what, not what can we do? How can we do it? How can we take the steps? You just do it. You just decide to do it, and you have faith that every step you take is with the best intentions. And when you make mistakes, everything's figure outable. One of my lovely teachers once shared that. Her name is Dharma. Everything's figure outable. You just do your best. There's your heart, allow your heart to shine through and have the courage to see beyond your own self, to see the bigger picture, the humanity. And when you can do that, when you can see humanity and lean in your support to what's happening in the world, it has tenfold effects on your own life. It should never be the incentive, right? That's not the incentive. Like, I'm going to do this thing to get something out of it. But we are multidimensional beings living in a world where we're all connected. We're all interconnected. It's not my pain or your pain, it's the pain. In the same way that I can experience the pain of the Jewish nation and what's going on in their own diaspora and sympathize with that, and still hold them accountable for their actions, because I see their higher selves, and I'm calling them to their higher selves, as people in my life do. There's no hall pass in life in terms of, oh, I did the work, I can lean back now on my laurels. No, we're always being held accountable by the people that love us. And I think the biggest misconception in the work that I do is that peace building work, being a mediator, conflict resolution, means that everything is peaceful, there are no problems. Actually, no, like, we actually are there to illuminate the greater truth that's happening, and to rebel rouse, and to upstir, and to show the problems that are actually under the surface that aren't being discussed. Because if we don't discuss these issues, it's a negative peace. It's not peace. You're in unhealthy discomfort, and that's where my trauma work comes into play. So trauma has such an effect on all of our lives. I know it's a hot topic in the world right now, and it's sensationalized, but at the heart of it, we are all experiencing collective trauma to individual trauma. And so if we can actually shed light to what's happening in our lives, or what's happening to people in the world, we can actually overcome. It doesn't have to be that monster in the closet anymore. And so doing this work isn't going to be easy. you know, you might notice like, wow, I tried to do a good thing. My intentions were there. I put this podcast up, or I had this conversation with somebody and I was just trying to be compassionate and they were not having it. Trust me, I'm having that problem right now. Like I've it's okay. It doesn't make you a bad person. It doesn't, and that again, that goes back to your own internal alignment. And that's why we have people in this world that are in the healing arts, that have done the work. We're still doing the work. I'm still doing the work, but I'm in a place of alignment where I know who I am. And I may forget sometimes, but I come back to who I am. I honor that. I love her. I love all the facets of me. I respect. And when those moments come where I forget, it's okay, because I know I'll come back around and remember that. And I'm so grateful to all of my teachers that have really taught me and help are holding me up on this path, right? So many great teachers. And so that being said, I can serve those that need that support. So you asked where you can find me. You can find me through Instagram. You have my information there. I'm just keeping it quite simple right now. But if you need that support, help with languaging, how to have difficult conversations, how to have mastered internal, not even mastered, but worked on your own internal dialogue. We struggle with internal conflict all the time, right? The thoughts in our head. So language, it's not just about the individual, it's about ourselves. But in short, always bring it back to love. I love you. I see the humanity in you. I see the humanity in the world. And I'm always praying for Israel's higher self, for community there. I'm always praying for the Palestinians' higher self to not lose hope, to continue to love. Because at the end of all of this, I don't want to see more hate. I don't want to see more destruction. I, you know, I just sat in ceremony yesterday and prayed for Israel, for Palestinians, for justice. And you might not think that justice is the way that we define it as. Justice is, it's not necessarily punishment. Somebody did me wrong, I'm going to punish them. Because if you think back to a time, and this is what was shared with me yesterday, so I'm grateful to these teachers. But if you think back to a time where somebody committed an act of injustice on you, did you receive justice? Did you receive support? Did you receive the validation or closure you needed? You probably didn't. And a lot of times, if you can really think back to some of those more traumatic experiences, and now think back to a time when you've committed an act of injustice to someone. Did you have to pay for it? Did you receive punishment? Justice is not about payback. Praying for people's higher selves, for the higher vision. And so if Israel needs security, to feel safe, to be whole, and to work through their trauma and oppression, I don't accept that it's being conducted on my people, but I pray for their internal peace, and I pray for humanity. So thank you.
Thank you so much. And I am just blown away because at the beginning of this recording, I pulled a card. You never guess. Like, I don't know if you can see it in my face. I pulled the justice card. Isn't that wild?
Oh my gosh.
I'm getting goosebumps. I couldn't believe it.
Wow.
And then questions that you offered, I think that's such a good practice and gives us something to work with as well. And thank you for everything that you're doing.
Thank you for holding this space, because you're uplifting me too, and holding us up. It means a lot. I've learned so much from this experience with you, and it's so needed, and catharsis and just sharing each other's wisdom. You had so much that I really felt and received. So thank you, thank you, thank you.